With the success of Marvel Rivals and being such a massive DC and Marvel fan, it really begs the question for me as to why DC has not created a DC Rivals equivalent to Marvel Rivals. Let's talk about it. YouTube, what's going on, man? It's Father Dark, and I'm up really late at night. Took a little cat nap after I streamed earlier today, playing the Season 4 of Marvel Rivals. And let me know in the comments what you guys think about Season 4. Have you had a chance to play Angela? Have you had a chance to play it at all? Are you enjoying it? Do you like any of the changes, the updates, and stuff like that? I am curious to know what you all think about it in the comments. But let's go ahead and get into the video. So, like I said, with me being a fan of DC and Marvel equally, so much so that I actually named my firstborn son after a prominent DC character and my secondborn son after a prominent Marvel character, and you guys have fun guessing what characters those are. But you know, as a fan equally of both of them, and you know, growing up doing nothing but reading Marvel and DC comics and stuff like that, watching the movies, TV shows, everything like that, it really makes me wonder why DC is always falling behind Marvel, especially with the fact that DC, if I'm not mistaken, their first characters like Batman and Superman and stuff were out way before Marvel characters came out and stuff like that and became more prominent. But what I've noticed though over time is that it just seems like Marvel's kind of always just had their stuff more together overall. I mean, whether it's been comic books and the characters that they've put out and stuff like that, movies, TV shows, and even now video games, it just seems like Marvel fans are just always eating so much better than DC fans. And you know, there's a lot of different things to cover in regards to stuff like that, but I took some notes and I just kind of want to just go through some things before I give my own personal opinion about it. So let's see, the history of DC games. DC has mostly leaned into fighting games like Injustice and stuff like that. They have some open world single player action games, mostly kind of like the Arkham series and stuff like that, which has always been kind of like their go-to as Batman, and making stuff around him. And they had Suicide Squad, but obviously Suicide Squad was just terrible to the point to where, I mean, they're giving that game away and they can't even do that. It reminds me of an episode of Family Guy where he goes to get that movie and they try to put the other movie in there and he's like, listen, I will literally leave if you try to give me that movie, even though the guy's like, bro, it's free. That's kind of how people feel about Suicide Squad. So, with the challenge of them making a game, basically what they would have to do is make an equivalent to Marvel Rivals that would need, a big roster of iconic and niche characters, balanced abilities, and a strong live service model. And they probably feel like that's risky after the Suicide Squad when they released that game. And I'll come back to that later in regards to why I kind of have an issue with that. The opportunity, if Marvel Rivals proves to be a long-term success, it could inspire WB/DC to try something similar. They do have the characters and the depths and stuff like, Justice League, Teen Titans, Legion of Doom, etc. There's so many things that they could pull from to be able to make a good hero shooter. Now, the likelihood, it's not necessarily out of the question, and I'll talk about that in a second as well. But WB and DC, they just tend to move a lot slower when it comes to just pretty much everything, not just their live service games, but just everything. I mean, look at what we've gotten in the last 20 years in regards to the MCU and stuff like that, and just so many different things. And then you look at just the absolute cluster that has been the DC, or DCU and all of that kind of stuff, and how many different things that they've gone through. So now I want to talk about like the likelihood and rumors that, we would actually be able to get a DC Rivals equivalent, right? So James Gunn, he was actually originally making movies for Marvel, as a lot of people know. He was doing like the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. Now, the Guardians of the Galaxy, they've had comic books and stuff, but he took the Guardians of the Galaxy and made them a household name, right, with his movies and the MCU and stuff like that. But he was asked in a couple of different press events whether DC might make something that's like an equivalent to Marvel Rivals, and this is a quoted response from me. He said, "It's totally possible. I'd be open to it, but that's not the same as there being a project in motion. More, if someone pitches it, we'd consider it. Then this is like happening now." And also too, Warner Brothers is hiring for a new live service DC game like project, and they have that listed as for an executive producer role at WB Games Montreal that explicitly mentions building a AAA game based on an iconic IP and having post-launch and live service operations experience. The listing requires experience in something like full game development life cycles, including live services. This suggests that DC/WB is continuing to lean into live service formats despite some recent failures like the Suicide Squad game, and this is from PC Gamer. So there is a possibility that they could make a game, but the thing is like I can't find any examples, or not examples, but any type of articles that actually say how long it took for them to make Marvel Rivals. But the thing is though is that you have to assume that games like this usually take about 4 or 5 years to make. There's so much stuff that goes into it before you can actually release it, not including like when you have to do like the alpha and stuff, which they did last year, probably around like summertime somewhere, and then you got like the beta, and then they finally released the game. And even then, once you release the game, we already know from Guang himself, he said that this stuff has to be planned a year out at least. Now, I feel like it would even be smarter to kind of do like a year of like concrete stuff, and then already have the second year like to where you're pretty much like what you're gonna do. You just kind of have to like finalize stuff, just because like you can't. There's no room for error when it comes to a live service game. It's not like you can say it's a live service game and then just go, oh well, we're gonna have to take a year or however many months to finish making like seasons and stuff like that. The only reason that the live service games are relevant is because they're constantly pumping out content. I mean, at first they were doing like 3-month long seasons, which is pretty standard, to where now it's like they're 2 months, but at the same time it's like we're getting content at the beginning of that month, and then at the beginning of the next month we're also getting new content. So it's like we're doing it monthly now, which is pretty wild for a live service game, and that's just because people are becoming more spoiled by games like this, where we just expect them to constantly be updating. If it takes any longer than a month, it's just it's kind of like the TikTok brain, where people just want stuff like this. They need it now and they need it quick. It's not like years ago where people would buy a game and that was pretty much what you got, and it might be years before you got a sequel, if you even got a sequel at all. Now let's talk about DC and Marvel kind of in general, like the comparison of why it always kind of seems like DC is behind Marvel. So basically with DC, their golden age, they had characters like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. They're huge, but then in the 1960s, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and also Steve Ditko, salute to them, they reinvented heroes, and they basically made heroes that were far more relatable. You take basically the heroes I just named, right? Like Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. Of those, the most relatable one is really Batman, and even Batman is not very relatable. Bro is a actual billionaire. He's been trained by all these different people. He had to travel the world. Like some comics, he had so many different people he was trained by. Some might say it was like 9, some might say it was 12, whatever, and he basically learned something from everybody, right? Long story short, as much as he might seem relatable because he's a human being, he's really not. Now you take someone like a Marvel character, like one of the most popular Marvel characters of all time, probably Spider-Man. Spider-Man is extremely relatable because he seems, even though he has powers, he has to deal with the stuff that everyone deals with every day. He's constantly dodging his landlord because his rent, he doesn't have that. He works like a really crappy job. His boss is terrible to him, etc. There's just so many different aspects about Peter Parker that are just extremely relatable, and I feel like that's why people have always loved Spider-Man as much as they do. And then you have, like I said, DC, where the way that they treat their characters is very much like almost like gods, the way that they're, portrayed and stuff. And that's cool. It doesn't mean that, people don't like DC. I feel like there's tons of people that love DC and they love Marvel. And also too, just out of curiosity, let me know in the comments too, if DC was to come out tomorrow with a, DC Rivals or Marvel Rivals equivalent, would you be interested in playing it? Would you be as interested in giving it a try as you were Marvel Rivals, if you're someone who, like myself, only gave this game a chance because of the Marvel IP? Now let's talk about more the movie aspect of Marvel versus DC, right? So Marvel built slowly and DC just kind of rushed in. Now, what's funny about that is that growing up, there weren't really Marvel movies and stuff like that. I'm sure there was like some random stuff here and there, but they weren't, it wasn't like when I was a kid, I was going to the theaters regularly to go see Marvel movies. It was always a Superman movie or a Batman movie that was coming out. That was kind of like something that you could just expect. And they really didn't branch out too far from that as far as like these super huge box office hit. And it wasn't until, I got around like later teenage years that we actually started to get the MCU. And they started out, they only had put out like a handful of movies, and then we got the first Avengers movie, and then you fast forward to current day and we have the equivalent of Endgame, which just had so many people in it that it's ridiculous. I mean, I remember reading about all the different actors and stuff they had in the movie, and I was just like, how is that even going to be possible? And we're still going forward to the point to where we're about to get to like, Doom and Secret Wars and just things that I never thought that I would actually realistically be able to see on the big screen and stuff like that. And then you have, Warner Brothers that came in and they were like, you know what we should do? We should do this kind of backwards. We should start out and we should kind of have like Justice League first. I mean, yeah, they had like, one or two movies prior to that, but they're like, we should just kind of make like a Justice League movie first and somehow put all these characters in here and then go backwards where we, after the Justice League movie, that's where we do individual movies and stuff like that. Not to mention the whole debacle with like Zack Snyder and how they tried to do the complete opposite, which I didn't really have necessarily a problem with that because I kind of like the contrast between how Marvel movies were very like, they didn't take themselves super seriously. I mean, they would to like a small little degree, but for the most part, nothing too crazy ever happens. It's mostly lighthearted, a bunch of jokes and stuff like that, which I feel like is a good reflection of how Marvel Comics kind of is overall. I mean, there's exceptions here and there, but for the most part, Marvel's very lighthearted, very like young reader friendly and stuff like that, whereas DC has always kind of went with the darker, gloomier kind of like aesthetic and stuff, specifically because Batman is like one of their main characters. But overall, their stories have always just been a little bit darker. And like I said, you had the Zack Snyder thing, but then they started trying to change like their kind of identity midway through. And I believe it was like Josh Whedon they brought in when they did like their testing for the Justice League, and they were like, I guess the execs were kind of like, oh, well, we need the movie to be funnier and have jokes and stuff. So you started getting Batman where he like smiles and stuff like that. And I just obviously that didn't work out for them, and now they're kind of, doubling back on that. And they brought in James Gunn to start kind of being like their head person, because that was kind of, I think, what they realized was the issue with Marvel in comparison to them, where with Marvel they had their guy that was like the main dude, was it Kevin Feige or whatever, who has, he's been the dude that's been there from the beginning, and everything kind of has to go through him. So that way, that's why we have with the MCU, everything feels so connected. And I know there's a lot of people now that are like, oh, they're just putting out slop. And I think with that, just a side note, that once you've gotten to the point where you had something as big as Endgame, people keep wanting everything to be as big as Endgame, and that can't always be the case. Even in comic books, you have these massive events like, Secret Invasion, Secret Wars, and so many just different things where it requires everyone to come together. It's these not just world ending, but like universe ending events and stuff like that. And then, you go to another comic where things are just kind of like street level, like Daredevil or whatever, right? And even with those people, they have their massive events and stuff. And I think people just they've gotten too spoiled with seeing like hundreds and hundreds of superheroes in a story or whatever at a time, to where they can't really appreciate the more like singular stories and one-offs and stuff like that. But going back to what we're talking about in regards to WB and stuff, another thing that I think is really important too is that they keep going through like all these different changes, right? Like corporate instability, where it's like, they've had different, leadership and strategy changes and stuff. Like at one point, AT&T had taken them over. They had the Discovery merger, the James Gunn / Safran era. Every new regime that they bring in, they all have like different priorities. So like it's hard to like do these long-term things, because obviously James Gunn doesn't want to come in and build off of stuff that was going on with Snyder, right? Because that's a completely different thing. And then that splits the community to where you have these people that are like, release the Snyder cut, and then you got those people beefing with like the James Gunn people beefing with the Snyder people. Like some of these people on Twitter make this like their full-time job, where they just sit back and do nothing but try to like spread negativity in regards to one or the other, instead of like just being able to collectively enjoy the stuff that is being put out there. Like, well, Snyder's Superman was better because he was darker and he snapped Zod's neck. And then you got people like, we want the James Gunn version where he wears like the light blue suit and is super chill and just whatever, right? And to me, that I just feel like that's ridiculous. People should just let these people come in and do what it is that they want to do and have their visions and stuff. And I feel like the blame and the onus should go on WB and whoever is currently in charge that is making these decisions, because clearly you can see what another company is doing and that it's working. That Disney, you know, because they're over the MCU and stuff like that. It basically is Disney, obviously. What they're doing is working. They have one guy. He collectively picks the different people and projects and all that kind of stuff. He figures out how this stuff is going to, be interconnected and work together. They can tell you the movies that are coming out. They 9 times out of 10 are coming out. They have shows on Disney Plus that are kind of like in between. And once again, you can't please everybody. I know there's plenty of people that get upset about different things and they go, oh, what's this or what's that? And sometimes it is kind of rough. It's kind of like a, catch-22 or like a, rock in a hard place with certain things because, for example, when me and my wife went to go see, the new Captain America movie, there was so many things that she had missed out on because she watches the movies and stuff with me, but she doesn't watch a lot of the shows. So for her, she was kind of confused as to like, she's like, oh, well, when did, the Falcon become Captain America? Even though she had seen, whatchamacallit, the Endgame movie and stuff, that was years prior. And she didn't really remember. And she's kind of like the casual watcher of these things or viewer or whatever, where they don't sit down and they don't watch like Falcon and Winter Soldier show that came out. I watched all of that. I've watched all the stuff in between. I understand what happened with Wanda, in WandaVision. So I understood like when, the Multiverse of Madness and all this stuff came out, I understood all the stuff that had happened in between. And me, I actually like that. And I appreciate that because that's really never been done before. Usually when you have like a cinematic universe or you just have movies and stuff like that, they don't really make TV shows that kind of explain what's going on in between. It's like you kind of just have to get that summarization in the movie. And to me, that takes up precious time that we could be going through other stuff. And that's how comics work. Like a lot of times in comics, you might see something like it might be X-Men versus Avengers. And you're like, well, when did this person happen? Or who's Hope Summers or whatever the case is. And it'll have like a little reference saying, if you're curious about this, go back and read this issue of yada, yada, yada. Right. And like I said, that's the trade-off where we're not getting how things used to be where when I was younger, when I was a kid, Batman movies were just Batman movies. They might be somewhat kind of connected, like between maybe 1 or 2 movies. And then after that, it just kind of starts fresh and things just are what they are. And they keep some things kind of like similar overall. But for the most part, though, it's like whatever new director comes in or whatever, that's their own story. And whoever wrote that, yada, yada, yada. And, even like with DC now, they're having that issue where people really like Matt Reeves, the Batman movie. And they're like, well, we want to see the Batman movie somehow get tied in with the new Superman movie. And I'm like, brother, those are 2 completely different worlds and universes, right? Like, honestly, the way that the Batman movies work is it's kind of, in my opinion, similar to Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight, where with his movies, his whole intention was to make Batman as accessible and realistic as humanly possible, to where everything that you saw in the movies, it was like there might be like a little bit of stuff that was kind of out of reach as far as technology and stuff, but it wasn't too far. It was kind of like watching Black Mirror, how the stuff you're seeing might exist in like 10 years or so or whatever, right? But for the most part, he wanted Batman to be as grounded as humanly possible in comparison to previous Batman movies and stuff like that. And that's what made the Dark Knight trilogy so good. And I feel like Matt Reeves just kind of like expounded upon that. So to see that Batman with like, Wonder Woman or Superman just wouldn't make sense to me. I feel like James Gunn would have to make his own version of Batman, kind of like with Snyder, where that Batman was kind of like over the top and more comic booky in a sense. And that to me makes sense. Like there's a time when, I might want to see a more realistic, grounded Batman. But then if I see Batman and he's like in the Justice League and lives in a world where there's superheroes and stuff, he has to be able to rise to kind of like make sense in that world. You get what I'm saying? So, back to the difference with like games and stuff like that. So DC is kind of like more like single player games is kind of like where they've excelled. I mean, the Arkham series was some of the best games that I've ever played. I mean, an open world Batman game where you literally feel like Batman and you just have so many different things that you can do and to choose from. And obviously like the final one that they did was absolutely just perfection in my opinion, right? But with Marvel, they don't mind really like experimenting. Even though with DC, they do like the single player games and they kind of have like the fighting games like Injustice and stuff like that, which are popular, but it's whatever. Marvel, like they do all types of stuff. They got their hand in the mobile games. They're doing like hero shooters and stuff like that now. They have the Marvel, Token Fighter or however you pronounce it, that's coming out next year or at the beginning or midway through the year, whatever, that people are really excited about. So it's kind of like they're covering all of their grounds. They even have the Black Panther and Captain America game that's coming out, if that hasn't been canceled. Let me know in the comments if it's been canceled, but last time I checked, it was still coming out. Also, too, DC, they were trying to do the same thing. They had like a Wonder Woman game that was supposed to be coming out for some strange reason. Like, anybody was asking for that. Not that I love Wonder Woman, I have an issue with that, but like I don't think anyone was asking for an open world Wonder Woman game, and then they ended up canceling it. And that kind of seems like something that they do a lot. Like they make these movies that people, they may be asking for, or maybe they're not asking for, but then they do all this stuff. Kind of like, you guys remember the Batgirl movie that was supposed to be coming out, and yeah, they just shelved it, and people were like, what is that supposed to be, like a tax thing or something, where it's like a tax write-off or something, because they made a whole entire movie and then just shelved it, and then they're like, it's never going to see the light of day. No trailer, no nothing. And if somebody did leak it one day, they'd probably go out of their way to copyright strike it and nuke it into oblivion. So there's just a couple of different things that are really, really weird with them, and it seems like they have a lower tolerance for like failure. Like and what's weird about that is that like they'll basically look at something, they'll say, like, for example, that's what I was saying earlier with the Suicide Squad game. They'll make something like the Suicide Squad game instead of just making like a Justice League game, because at the end of the day, the Suicide Squad is cool and everything, but who, like, if you could choose, right, just be honest here, if you could choose to play a Justice League equivalent of that game where you were taking down different villains and stuff, or you say, hey, you want to be the villain and then you take down the Justice League and like delete Batman, who the hell is gonna choose that? Like, sometimes people just have a thing where they overcomplicate stuff for no reason. Like, there's no reason to overcomplicate it. We get into a lot of these things because we enjoy the hero. Like, of course, there's people who like certain villains, and that's cool. You have some villains that become sometimes more popular than the superhero. But for the most part, though, most people are reading these stories from the perspective of the superhero. That's how we're seeing things. How often is something really successful where we're seeing it from the villain's perspective and we're rooting for the villain in that thing, unless it's kind of like an anti-hero kind of deal, kind of like with Deadpool, or like even like, Wolverine, when he was more like Weapon X type Wolverine. But then eventually they end up becoming good, right? Even a lot of times with villains, sometimes they'll start out as a villain, kind of like you think about Harley Quinn. She started out, she was supposed to be a sidekick to a villain. Then eventually she became almost more popular than that villain, and to the point to where now she has TV shows and she has her own series and all kinds of stuff. She's been the forefront of the Suicide Squad, and she started making this transition to where it's like, well, I don't actually want to be bad. I was only bad because I was trying to appease the Joker, but forget the Joker. Now I'm trying to be positive, and it's kind of like I'm an anti-hero, right? And that's kind of like how that usually works. But the point I was originally making before I went on that little rant, I apologize, is that these companies will do something that no one wants or no one is asking for, and then when it fails, they'll sit back and they'll go, oh, well, we shouldn't do that again. And they don't just mean like we shouldn't make that mistake of making a game and doing the game in a way that no one wants. They'll say we just shouldn't make this game or make games, period, or make those types of games. Like, brother, I mean, what are you doing? That's like getting in your car and then driving into a brick wall at full speed and then going, I don't ever want to drive cars anymore. Or maybe, crazy idea, just don't drive your car into a brick wall or anything that's stationary, maybe just drive the car the way it was intended to be drove. And what's crazy about it is that for me, it's really wild, right? You take anything, you take like content creation, making a video. There's plenty of videos that I could make that only I care about, topics that only are relevant to me. But if I notice that there are things that are relevant to you all, that's what dictates what videos I make, because you are the ones that have to watch it. I'm not making videos so I can I don't watch my own videos. So when I'm making videos, I'm making them for you. When I make thumbnails, I'm making thumbnails that you all enjoy. A lot of times you all don't realize it, but I do this thing called test and compare, where I actually put up numerous thumbnails in the Creator Studio, and all of you might be seeing a different thumbnail. And based off of how frequently a certain thumbnail is clicked on, that's the one that I'll go with. And I keep that stuff in mind in the future, and will tend to go in that direction. A lot of you are like, why do you make these Gooner thumbnails? Because when I make the ones that aren't Gooner thumbnails, you don't click on them. So that's the direction that we go in. And it's the same thing with anything else in our Discord server, which if you haven't joined the Discord, join it. Link should be on my profile page under more info next to my logo. But the point I'm making is that the Discord server was made for you all to join and be able to play numerous different video games, not just Marvel Rivals. They have everything in there. They got Fortnite, Minecraft, Ready or Not. I mean, Street Fighter 6, anything that you can think of that's relevant that people like to play right now, there's a channel for it. And if there's not, people literally just ask, and you know what I do? I make a channel for it, because the server is for you all. I didn't make a server just for myself to sit in it and talk to myself. So why would I not do the things that you all want? We live in a day and age of social media where they could just put a poll up right now and say, hey, would you guys play a game that's like this? What kind of game would you like to play? But they would rather sit back in an office and talk amongst themselves, amongst people who do not play video games. That's what's so crazy to me. You could just ask people and say, hey, what would you like? And people will tell them. And the fact that they don't do that, it's just, to me, it seems like a lot of pride and a lot of ego in them thinking that they know something better than other people do. When I don't know something, I have zero problem just asking. If you don't play video games, why not talk to people that play video games? But you're mad that when you make these video games, people don't like them. I'm not saying that that's happened with everything. There's some things that they've done that have been success. The Arkham games are a perfect example. The Injustice games were good, but could they be better in my opinion? Yeah, because I never had the urge to play any of the Injustice games. The story I like, but that's really just from a comic book though. And I'd rather just read the comic book, which I've done numerous times. So, there's that. But did I enjoy the Arkham games? Loved them. Especially when they went open world. Loved those. Played the hell out of them. But yeah, I feel like I've went on long enough of a rant. Plus, my wife wants me to play some ranked with her, so I'm gonna go do that in a moment. But like I said, I am curious to know what you all think. What do you think if they were to release a DC Rivals game? Would you guys be interested in playing that? Is there anything that I left out that you feel like is important in regards to DC and the problems they've had? And it doesn't even have to just be about DC Rivals, because I feel like I said, there's a reason why I went into other aspects other than just DC when it comes to games and stuff like that. Because for a while now, I've kind of been frustrated with them because, like I said, it's been like over 2 decades now since they originally started. Actually, has it been over 2 decades? No, I think Iron Man came out in 2008. I could be wrong, but we're coming up on 2 decades of Marvel just consistently just pumping out stuff for us, whether it's TV shows, movies, great comics, video games and stuff like that, to the point to where this is where we are now with Marvel Rivals. They don't ever stop, right? And it doesn't seem like they're going to for a very, very long time, if even that. Whereas DC just seems like they cannot get it together. And I don't understand why. You have a roster that is equally just as big as Marvel. Some people may disagree, but in my opinion, when you really sit back and you think about it, because I regularly go back and I watch, I don't know if you guys remember like the Justice League Unlimited show and stuff like that. They have so many characters and an equal amount of amazing villains and stuff like that. Like I said, it's not just the Justice League. You also have Teen Titans and so many other different aspects and stuff like that. They have like the more like, whatever you want to call it, spiritual side and the magical side and stuff like that as well. Pretty much for anything you can think of that exists in regards to Marvel, DC has some type of equivalent. Now, it may not be as popular, but that works both ways. There's characters that Marvel has tried to make equivalents to that have not been as popular. Like if you had to ask, like, do you think that Captain Marvel is as popular as Superman? No. Do you think that Moon Knight is as popular as Batman? No. But at the same time, like, there's equivalents to Iron Man on the DC side, and those aren't as popular, and et cetera, et cetera. You could go back and forth all day long, but at the same time, they have more than enough foundation to make whatever they wanted to, and they just don't. They do these really dumb things, and then they go, oh well, no, we're not gonna do that anymore because that didn't work out. And it's like, it didn't work out because your idea was terrible. Maybe don't have ideas, and people will actually buy whatever it is. Right? So that's just my thoughts and opinions on it. But, like I said, I would be really interested personally to see a DC Rivals game. I would probably play that just as much as I played this game. I'd probably go back and forth. And the thing is, too, that's interesting is that they could learn from the mistakes of Overwatch and the mistakes of Marvel Rivals and just do the things that people wish they would do in this game or not do in this game, whether it be matchmaking or the way that they, tend to release a lot of other skins that aren't just like the straight up comic book versions that a lot of people want. They could just come out the gate with all that stuff, right? Like just off the rip. I'm not saying that Rivals doesn't, we just got a couple of, but it kind of seems like they're, with NetEase, they're kind of like, here, take these original skins. just take this, get out my face, right? While we sit over here and make 30 or 40 other skins that ain't nobody asked for, like the 14th version of like the Phoenix and Venom or Symbiote or whatever, mix up or whatever, like that Luna Snow skin that they just released for the season 4 battle pass. That thing looks rough, man. That just looks like somebody literally just slapped a bunch of nonsense together and said, yeah, no, this is good. Like the fact that somebody literally looked at that when they were done with it and said, yeah, I think this is a good skin. We should put this as the first skin that you see when you open the battle pass. Not saying that all the skins in the battle pass are bad. There's a lot of them that are good, but that one, I don't know who made that, bro. Stop, just stop. But yeah, I'm going off though. I'm going on a tangent. I do apologize. There was a lot to cover, and like I said, I could go on a lot longer in regards to this, but it's interesting, and it's also kind of frustrating because, like I said, it's not a situation where I want to see DC fail. I love DC equally as much as I love Marvel. I wouldn't, trade either one of them. And it's not, to me, it's not a competition. They both exist and serve a purpose. It's like we need the Justice League stuff the same way that we need the Avengers. One's a little more happy-go-lucky and comical and stuff, whereas the other one is darker and really has these deep, compelling stories and stuff like that. So like I said, those are just my thoughts on it though. But I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this video up. I do appreciate you all for listening. I'm Father Dark, and I'll catch you on the next one.